Hello everyone. Welcome to NCSL's webinar, Make Your Mark, Practical Tools to Expand Your Personal Presence. My name is Megan McClure and I will be moderating the webinar today. I'm the liaison to the Legislative Research Librarians and Leadership Staff Professional Associations with NCSL. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange and engagement. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage participation through our chat box. So feel free to type your questions and answer any questions in the chat box, which is in the lower left hand of your screen. To begin building some comfortability with the chat function and to also learn who is on the line today, I invite you to type in the state from which you are calling in from. I want to briefly mention the resources. Above the presentation, you will see a couple tabs with one of them labeled Resources. Here you can find and download a PDF of the PowerPoint slides. Another tab is labeled Speaker, where you can read the bio of today's speaker. You can access these tabs at any time during the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on NCSL's website within the week. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Rachel Beohm. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Megan. I am very excited to be here today and share with all of you one of my most favorite topics to talk about, and that is personal presence. What I do with clients and audiences is I help people to be and also present the best and most powerful version of themselves. And this has led to all sorts of wonderful things. It builds relationships, it moves people forward on their goals, and it can absolutely change lives. And I've seen that not only in my clients' lives and stories, but also in my own life. When I was a teenager and a young adult, I was painfully shy. I couldn't raise my hand in class to answer a question that the teacher asked when I knew the answer because I didn't want anyone to look at me. And later, when I was in college, I happened to be observing one day when my mentor was coaching a graduate teaching assistant on presentation skills for teaching her class. And right before my very eyes, it was like magic. I watched as this young, inexperienced, nervous, flighty, I might say, young student teacher transformed into an educator with presence. And I thought, man, that is what I need. And so I started learning everything I could about it, and I eventually started sharing what I was learning with others, and now I go all around the country sharing that with other people. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is I'm going to give you some specific tips on how the nonverbal communication skills that I learned then and have continued to learn can absolutely change the way you communicate, the way people perceive you, and even change your life. Now, you might be asking why nonverbal communication, and that is the first thing that I'll go into today. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about nonverbal communication, and then a couple of minutes on the concept of presence itself. And then for most of the rest of the hour, I will go into the 4 components of presence and give practical tools that you can use to communicate presence in the first 3 of those 4 areas. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about authenticity, because that always comes up when we're talking about nonverbal communication. So my first question is, why nonverbal communication? And the number one answer is that it is the biggest part, the biggest component of communication. There are all sorts of studies out there, and frankly, they do not agree on what percentage of our communication is nonverbal, but they do agree that it is the biggest part. And you know this from personal experience. I mean, this is why sarcasm works, right? If you say to someone, hey, great job yesterday on that presentation that you gave, that is a very different message than great job, right? It sends a totally different message just by the words are exactly the same. And as communicators, that is the thing that you need to keep in mind, is that if there is a mismatch between what you say with your words and what you say with your body and your voice tone and your facial expressions, people believe the nonverbals every single time. And so that's our first goal that we are hoping to accomplish today through this webinar, is to get congruent. so that what you are communicating with your nonverbals matches your intended message, that you actually get it across, both who you are, what you're all about, and what your message is, that those two things match. So that's going to be part of what we cover today. The second reason why nonverbal communication is such a huge part of presence is because it's a universal language. It is universally understood. Now, of course, there are some specifics to culture as you go around the world. Just like there are dialects in any language, there are certain things that don't mean the same thing across cultures. But your basic facial expressions, all your basic nonverbals are universally understood. And in fact, we are hardwired from birth to be able to understand them. And it's like other universal languages, like, say, math. The word for 1 plus 1 in English is different than the words you use to say 1 plus 1 in French or whatever other language, but the concept is the same, and it means the same thing. The answer is always the same, no matter what the language is. Music is another example of a universal language. The thing is, even though we're hardwired to be able to pick up on some of these cues, that doesn't mean we're actually really good at it. In fact, most of us really stink at interpreting the nonverbal cues of others and making sure that our own nonverbals are aligned with our message, because it still requires some training and some practice, just like those other universal languages. And just because math is a universal language doesn't mean that we all automatically know calculus. Or just because we can all go sit in a concert hall and hear the music and enjoy it and appreciate it on some level, doesn't mean we can all get up on the stage and do it. It requires some training and it requires some practice. So that's the second goal for today, is to just increase, first of all, our awareness of some of these skills you might not even know that you have or are doing. And then secondly, to increase your skill in those areas. And then the third reason why nonverbal communication is such a big deal in this context, and by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. There are all sorts of reasons why I love nonverbal communication, and based on the content of my presentation, sometimes I choose different ones. But for today, nonverbal communication is important because it can actually change your brain. It's a bit of a loop, actually. Body language starts in the brain. What you think often shows up in some of those nonverbal cues. I had a client once who came for help with presentation skills, and she was, every time she said the name of her topic, the thing that she was presenting on, she kind of scrunched her nose up a little bit, like a rabbit. And at first I ignored it, but it was consistent. So finally I said, okay, what's going on here? Every time you say what you're talking about, your nose scrunches up. And that is the nonverbal, universal nonverbal sign for contempt, or it could mean you're a bunny rabbit. And so what's going on there? And she thought about it, and well, first of all, spoiler alert, she's not a bunny rabbit. But we really dug down into what that meant, and she said, I really believe in my topic. I know it works, but it's so simple that I'm afraid the audience is going to dismiss it, and they're going to think it's stupid. And so she was communicating that. She was communicating what she expected from the audience every time she said that. So what goes on in our head often shows up in our body, but the opposite is also true. How we use our body affects our thoughts and our feelings, and particularly our hormones. So you've probably heard that if you're not feeling great and you force yourself to smile, that releases endorphins and you feel better. Or if you see a genuine smile on someone else, that also releases endorphins. You may have heard that if you stand with expansive posture, it releases testosterone into your system, which is the confidence hormone. Or if you touch someone, this actually just happened yesterday. My 11-year-old daughter, if you have an 11-year-old, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. We were kind of clashing a little bit, and we were both a little bit irritated with each other. And I forced myself a minute or two later as I was walking past her to just pat her on the shoulder. All I did was just pat her on the shoulder. And when you touch another human being, it releases oxytocin, which is another calming hormone and a bonding hormone. And we both felt a lot better just with that little touch, and we were able to move on. So how you use your body, the things that you do, can shape the way you think and the way you feel about others and about yourself. And so that is our third goal here. Hopefully by the end of this webinar, once you start practicing some of the things that we're going to talk about here today, you'll notice all three of these in your life. And I would love to, by the way, if that happens for you, I'd love to hear your stories. So at the end, I'll put my email address up there, and you can tell me how you've used it. I'd love to hear that. So how we show up to other people is nonverbal. You can use words, but they will always believe your nonverbals more. So secondly, I'd like to go into this concept of presence a little bit. And here's where I'd like to invite some audience participation. When you think about presence, what does that mean for you? Like, what is presence? What does it look like? Go ahead and type in your chat box there some of the things that you think of or you see when you think of the word presence. In a minute, I will tell you my definition, but if you have any comments or ideas, I would love to hear. Eye contact, confidence, how one appears to other people, tuned in, posture, authority. Well, they're coming very fast. I can't read that fast. First impressions, okay, self-assurance, energy, demeanor, posture again. Good bearing, good. Presence to me means listening. Okay, excellent. Filling up the room you're in with your energy. Great. Okay, I love these answers. You are going to hear a lot of these as we go through recognition, in charge, as we go through this webinar. I'm going to minimize the chat now and tell you what my personal definition of presence is, and that is your nonverbal persona. That it's simply that. It's how you show up to others non-verbally. So the good news, and perhaps the bad news, is that you already have a presence. The question is it the presence that you want? It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be big, it could be small, it could be strong, it could be mild or bland. But you have a presence. The thing is, if you want to have a big, positive, powerful presence, you have to be willing to be seen. You have to be willing to be noticed. You can't be a stalker. My friend and I joke about her mom, who we call her a stalker on social media, because she goes on there on Facebook, and she sees everything. She sees every post, every comment, every picture, but she never posts anything herself. She never comments on anything, and she never likes anything. So you don't know she's there. She has no social media presence, so to speak. So if you want to have presence, the first step is you have to actually be willing to be seen, and then you need to be purposeful about how you're coming across. The fact is most of us have no idea how we come across. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through the 4 components of presence. The first one is the mind. What's going on in your head, as I've already said, comes across to others. And so we need to take a look at that and be purposeful and proactive about what's going on in there. The second component of presence is your body. What are you doing with your body? What messages are you sending? How do other people interpret or perceive that? The third component is space. How do you interact with the space around you? How much space are you aware of, and how much do you claim? And then the last component of presence is others. And this is the one that I'm not going to delve into a great deal, because the first 3 are the foundation. You can't really figure out how others are receiving your message unless you first know what message it is that you're sending. And not to mention that that's a huge topic in and of itself. So today we're going to talk about growing our presence primarily in those first 3 areas. And to do that, we have to break out of autopilot, out of the habits that most of the time we don't even know that we're doing, increase in awareness, and then from there move from awareness to action in each of these 3 or 4 components. So the first one is the mind. And this is really where presence starts. If you want to have presence, you need to be present. You need to be here now. You got to get off your phone, clear the distractions, and show up in the present moment to have presence. Those words are absolutely, completely connected. Now, there are all sorts of distractions that take us out of the present moment. I'm going to focus today on one, and that is what I call the voice. Now, you know the voice. You're probably very intimately acquainted with the voice. This is the voice that lives inside your head and is constantly chattering in the background. Often it's negative, not all the time, but often it's negative. It's often full of negative self-talk, things like, who do you think you are? What's wrong with you? Why can't you get anything right? This will never work. Sometimes it's, all these negative thoughts. We usually have our favorites, and the voice says them over and over and over again. But even if the voice is not negative, you cannot hear and be present for real people if you're listening to your imaginary friend in your head. I mean, try turning on a podcast right now and see how well you can pay attention to this webinar if you have another one or a podcast going on at the same time. The voice in your head is just as distracting. Don't kid yourself. It's just because no one else can hear it that somehow means that you can be present for them. And especially if the voice is saying all these negative things, then that can undermine your confidence, which definitely affects how you come across. Now, not only does the voice tell us all sorts of negative things about ourselves, it also loves to make up stories about other people and what other people are thinking and what other people are, what their motives are. And we believe our thoughts. We believe our stories here. I had a client once come in for a session, and she was just spitting nails. And she came and she said, Rachel, I was at a retreat last week, and we're at some place, and my boss has a house with a boat on the lake in that town. And so after the meetings of the day, he invited every single person onto his boat except me. And she was just so upset about it. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she said, it means he doesn't respect me. He thinks I'm doing a lousy job. He thinks I'm incompetent. I mean, she just went on and on and on about all the things he thought about her because he hadn't invited her onto the boat. And of course, we unpacked it and went through it all, and we figured out that really it had to do with something else, most likely. The fact is, we don't know. We don't know what the stories are, but when you have a negative story about someone else, it is going to change the way you interact with that person, because we communicate based on the stories that we tell in our head. We believe them. We think they're true, but people can tell they might not be able to put words to it. No one's a mind reader, and neither are you. That's why you don't know what's going on in someone else's head. But we cue people on how to respond to us based on what's going on in our head. It's like that story that I told at the beginning about the lady who's scrunching up her nose. There is actually, in the book Made to Sick, Dan and Chip Heath cite a study in which the way that we approach other people often cues them onto how we are expecting them to respond to us. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. I had another client once who she'd actually come she wanted to get a promotion, so we were working on that. But at one of her sessions, she said, can we actually work on dating today? She was about 30, at the time. And she'd been doing online dating, and it wasn't going well, and so we did some role play. At first, she was her, and I was me. And then I said, okay, let's switch. And so I adopted the posture that she had, which was, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but she was completely scrunched up in a little ball, all small and hunched over. And so I just did that as she had been doing that, and her eyes popped open. She said, is that what I look like? She had no idea. And I said, yes, that's exactly what you look like. And she just rolled her eyes and thought, well, no wonder. No wonder these aren't going very well. I look so scared and intimidated and closed. And we have no idea often what message we are sending to others based on the stories that we are telling. So at this point, I'm going to ask a bit of a question here. I'd love for you to take this poll. What does your voice love to distract you with? Is it a to-do list, all the things that you need to do or the things you're going to have to do when you're done with whatever's going on right now? Are you thinking about what you need to say back to the person? Are you coming up with a reply? Are you analyzing them? Are you making up stories about what they're thinking about you? Are you being negative to yourself? What are the things that you have a tendency to think? And then I'm looking here at there they go. So far, all the things I have to do is the number one answer. Thinking about, did I close the garage door when I left? I need to make sure to stop by the store on my way home and pick up blah, blah, blah for dinner. Let's see what else. We also have a bunch of people coming up with reply. Yes, that I think is a Stephen Covey quote. Most people listen with intent to reply rather than intent to understand. Let's see, we've got a bunch of people, too, also analyzing the other people's words and actions. So you're sitting there trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes instead of just being present in the moment. Okay. I think we have most of them in there. So here's the deal with that. The stories that you make up, the voices going on in your head, whatever it is that you're talking about, it takes you out of the present moment, and it also affects the way that you communicate. Benjamin Zander wrote in The Art of Possibility, a classic leadership book from, I think, the 80s. Every story you tell is founded on a network of hidden assumptions. If you learn to notice and distinguish these stories, you'll be able to break through the barriers of any box. So whether it is you're thinking about what you were going to say next, or whether you are thinking about all the things you need to do next, the fact of the matter is you're taking yourself out of the present moment, and you aren't actually able to be with the person or the situation or the audience that you need to communicate with at the moment, and that reduces your presence. All the time spent in your head is time taken away from the person that you're with. And the thing is, the present moment is the only moment you can actually act in. It's the only moment in which you can influence other people or you have any impact on the future. You can't act in the future. You can only act now. But the things that you say and do now do have an impact on the future. So clear all that out. Clear out all the to-do lists. Clear out all the things you need to remember. Clear out all the trying to figure out what's going on in the other person's head and trying to figure out what you're going to say. It will come to you. If you are present and you are breathing, the right answer will come to you. Oftentimes what happens is the person's talking about this and you're thinking about what you want to say, and then the conversation morphs. And before you know it, that's not even, your answer no longer applies, but you still want to get it out because it's a good one. So cut that out. If you want to have presence, you need to be present. So the second component here is body language, of course, what you're doing with your body. And most of us are painfully unaware of what we are actually doing with our bodies because we don't go around with a mirror all the time looking at ourselves. It took me a long time to figure out where all these nervous tics and things came from. And the fact is we don't see ourselves. We see other people, but we don't see ourselves. That's why videotaping can be such an awful experience. I had a client once that I had coached on presentation skills, and I was really trying to get him to open up. He was going to be speaking for a luncheon where there's going to be, I think, 1,000 people. I said, you need gestures that are going to be big enough to encompass the whole room. And it's hard, in our little studio, but I kept trying to tell him to be bigger and bigger. And when he came back to debrief, he had the video of it, and he actually debriefed with a colleague of mine, and as they were watching it, he said, "You're going to be so impressed with how big my gestures are." He was so excited. And they sat down, they watched it, and as they're going on, he's like, okay, I think this is where the big gestures come in. And I was like, no, that's not it. Okay, maybe it's the next one. And they watched the whole thing, and finally he said, man, I wasn't big enough. It felt like I was being so big, but they weren't big enough for that space. So often we have no idea in relation to others how we're coming across. This is the very first step. Having someone who's willing to tell you or videotaping yourself is a great way to do that. The problem is we don't think of our bodies as a vehicle for communication. We think of it as it's a vehicle for our brain. It's just sort of like how our brain gets from place to place. We need our brain to come over here to this meeting, and we need our brain to go over there and talk to this person. And our body is just sort of the mechanics of that. But that's not what it is. It is the means by which you present yourself to the world. It is a vehicle for presence, and it is through our body that we communicate. So whatever kind of presence it is that you want, that's going to show up in different ways. I'm going to focus in this section on body language that presents a calm, capable, confident presence. And I'm going to give you 3 don'ts, 3 things to avoid, and what to do instead in order to communicate a capable, confident, calm presence. So the first one is don't shrink. And this is what I was talking about with that woman who was dating. We curl in. This is natural fight or flight response. We curl in when we're nervous or threatened. But then that sends a message, I'm nervous and threatened. Don't look at me. Don't talk at me. It absolutely lacks presence. It means I'd rather be hiding in the corner than talking to you right now. So instead, if you can stand up just to your full height, that's all it is. And there are a lot of people who are tall who have a hard time with this. Not everyone by any means, but sometimes, especially teenagers, they don't know how tall they are. They haven't actually grown mentally into their full height, and so they have a tendency to be kind of awkward. They haven't accepted their height once. And I also had a client once who he was very sort of shrunken and pulled in. And over the course of our first session, I finally, at the end, I said, this is a story that I'm making up about you, but my story is that you're afraid of intimidating people by your height, so that's why you try and make yourself small. And his jaw just about hit the floor, and he stopped, and his eyes got big, and he said, I've been ashamed of my height my whole life. And so all we did with him was work on just standing up to your full height, just being as tall as you are, and it completely revolutionized how people responded to him, even strangers on the street. When you're taking up as much space as you need, it makes you look confident and credible. It says, I belong here. I'm comfortable in myself. And it says, I'm present. I'd love for you to try this right now. Just wherever you are, try pulling in and just making yourself as small and shrunken and as you can. And do that for like 20 seconds. And then expand out and make yourself at least as tall as you are. If you want, you can make yourself even bigger. Try it. And then I'd love to hear how that feels. Does it feel any different to you, one versus the other? You can go ahead and write in the chat box if you have a comment about what it feels like to pull in, what it feels like to sit up or stand up tall. How do you think it might come across differently to other people? What kind of comments do you have there on that? It actually affects the way you breathe. And as I mentioned before, shrinking in is fight or flight. You cannot breathe very well when you're shrunken down and pulled in like that. And you can send yourself into fight or flight if you make yourself very small. I hear scared versus confident, closed versus open to the world. And that's exactly what it looks like, too, I might say. Pulling in is uncomfortable. Standing tall physically feels better. Absolutely. Your digestion works a lot better, too, when you have good posture. Nervous versus confident, shy versus comfortable. Pulling in makes me feel a lack of confidence. Filling the space. I own this space and I belong here. Absolutely. We're going to talk about space a little bit more later, but that's absolutely true. Closed versus free. Exactly. So when you're open, and that's not one that I have here, when you're open, it sends a message that you're trustworthy. You have nothing to hide with your hands, if you could just open up with your hands. I agree versus closed, and closed versus free. More alert when open, absolutely. And standing tall definitely does make me feel better. Great. So those are some of your comments on shrinking versus opening up. I want you to think, and this is just for you, you don't have to type it in the chat box. I just want to think about instances in which you do tend to shrink because they are there. Even if you are generally a confident person, you might, in your office or with whomever it is that you're working with, you might be confident, and then you might be dealing with your mother-in-law, and you all like kind of shrinking in the corner. I bet there is some place, some person in which you are naturally more at ease standing up straight, and there's probably somewhere where you tend to shrink a little bit. So write that down for yourself somewhere to be aware of that. Where is somewhere where you feel like you kind of want to make yourself small? And then consciously and proactively work on opening up in those situations and standing up tall. All right, the second thing with your body that I want to mention is don't lean. Now, there's nothing in the world wrong with leaning. There's a time and a place for it. There's a time to be casual. There's a time to be relaxed, and certainly open is often a very good thing. So that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, with leaning, but it sends the message that it sends that casual message. And if you want to be capable of confident, then instead what you need to do is, again, be straight. So I was talking earlier about being tall. Now I specifically want to talk about having your weight on both feet. When you're leaning, your weight is off to one side. It skews your body. And when you are straight, it sends the message that you are grounded, not easily shaken. It's a very solid presence. I had another client once who came in for coaching, and she was a very strong, powerful, I might even say a little bit intimidating woman. And she came to me, at her first session, she said, "Would you believe that some people call me intimidating?" And I just thought to myself, yeah, actually, I can totally see how that could happen. But she had been referred to me for presentation skills in running meetings. They said she needed more authority. I thought, really? Because she was very authoritative in how she communicated one-on-one. So I had her stand up and pretend to present the meeting, and what do you know? She's a completely different person. She leaned over to one side. She was very almost deferential, and her voice was curling up at the end of statements. She was saying, "Okay, well, it's probably time to start the meeting now. Today we're going to talk about blah, blah, blah." And I thought, wow, this is a totally different person. So that sends a very different message. If you want to come across as being capable and confident, if you want to come across as someone who knows what they're talking about and whose opinion carries some weight, you need to demonstrate that, as simple as it sounds, in the way that you stand, or even if you're sitting. You can sit up straight versus leaning. Again, I'd like you to try this right now. Lean over to the side if you're sitting. If you're in a place where you can stand up, I invite you to do that too, because it's a different experience slightly. But lean to the side, all your weight over on one side. Let your, kind of like you're maybe at happy hour or something. And then sit or stand up straight with your weight firmly planted either on both feet if you're standing, or if you're sitting, on both sits bones, so that you feel very grounded. And again, I'd love to hear how that feels. Go ahead and write in the chat box once you've tried them both. How does it come across differently? If you're in a group, if you're in a room, look around and see how it looks on other people too. How do other people come across if you're all watching this together? How do other people come across differently if they're leaning versus sitting or standing up straight? And again, I want to make a big point that there's not any problem with leaning to the side. It just depends on what kind of presence you want. If you have been told that you're intimidating or too authoritative, then you might want to lean a little more in your life. Okay, so you're casual versus professional. Twice, two people said that. Slouchy versus alert, lazy versus alert. So think about that. Think about the message that comes across. You're relaxed. You're sending the message that you don't care in a professional environment. Alert, attentive, hadn't realized how badly I've been slouching. I love it. Indecisiveness versus control. Now that's another thing. When you are leaning to the side, it sends the message that you're interested in what other people have to contribute. You're open to other thoughts and ideas, whereas when you are standing or sitting up straight with your weight over both feet, instead that sends a message that you are the decisive one. So it really does depend on what kind of message you want to send apart or send across. Leaning feels like I might not be totally sure about what I'm saying. Whereas standing up straight says, I know what I'm talking about, and that is absolutely true. So when you are standing up straight, and again, that straight head that goes with the straight posture shows up in the tone of your voice. So if you have that straight, still head, it can also help your voice to be a little bit more flat and maybe curled down at the ends of statements, which sends the message, I know what I'm talking about, you need to listen to me, and it also conveys one-way communication. I am talking to you, and you're listening. Whereas when your weight is off to the side, and often that means that your head also is off to the side, maybe even nodding a little bit, that also impacts the tone of your voice. Now you can probably hear it in my voice. You can hear the nodding, you can hear the smile, and it's much more friendly and much more approachable. And it also encourages, like I said, other people to speak, but it's not nearly as decisive. So it really comes down to what kind of a presence you want in any specific moment, and that's something that you need to decide and you need to think about. But that is, again, something just to keep in mind. And I will also encourage you to write down somewhere, if you did it for the previous one, where are some places where you find yourself leaning or slouching inappropriately? If you're at happy hour, if you're watching TV at home on the couch, if you're, chit-chatting with people before a meeting starts or at a conference, absolutely, by all means, be approachable, lean to the side, relax. That's great. Where are some times that you do it inappropriately? And write that down so that you can work on it. And keep in mind, too, as you sit at your desk, maybe no one else is paying attention to you, but your body language, as I said earlier, it shapes what's going on in your brain. So even when you're typing out emails, leaving voice messages, that type of thing, your posture can impact the tone of those messages. The third and last thing that I'm going to say here for the body section, and of course I could go on all day about all of these. I'm just hitting a few highlights here. But the third one is be careful about your fidgeting. All the little nervous tics that people do, they bounce their knees and they play with their watches or jewelry, or they kick or they drum on the table with their fingers, or whatever the case may be. Most people have some sort of nervous tic that they do, and nervous here is the key word. Again, when you're in fight or flight, your body has energy. Your brain sends, instead of, I won't get into all the details, but basically if you're having a fight response, you're angry, your body sends extra energy to your arms, and so that's where you get things like rapidly tapping pens or clenching fists or drumming on the tabletop. If you're having a fight response, your body sends that energy to the knees, and that's where you get bouncy knees or jimmy legs or knocking knees or any of those kinds of things. Essentially, all those little fidgety things that we do with our body sends a message that, again, we're not comfortable, and that demonstrates a lack of confidence. So if you can calm your body, a calm body demonstrates a calm mind, and that communicates confidence. I have a whole, I took it out for lack of time, but the number one way that you do this is through your breathing. So I will just mention that here. If you ever feel like your body is running away with you, just make sure that you're breathing well, and that will help you ground yourself and get rid of some of those nervous tics and nervous energy. I want you to try this one too. This might feel a little silly, but go ahead and start just fidgeting in your seat and then tell me how it feels. If you're the type of person that taps the foot, if you're the type of person that twirls hair or takes glasses on and off obsessively, or plays with your phone or a pen or whatever the case may be. However it is that you tend to act when you're nervous, try it. And then take a nice deep breath. Feel your feet on the floor, even if you're sitting, ground down, and sit up or stand up tall. Feel that weight down through the seat, and allow your body and your mind and your voice to become calm and still and powerful. What's your experience there? What do you notice? How are those different for you? I had a client come once for a job interview. He just moved to the area and he signed up for a set of 3 sessions for me. And it just so happened that after his first session, he had an interview that afternoon. So it was very kind of, okay, what can we do right now today? And that was one of the things that we worked on the most, was just sitting up tall, opening up through the shoulders, and making sure that he wasn't fidgeting. He said it was the best interview he'd ever had, and he did end up getting that job. Does anyone have any comments here on fidgeting versus having a calm, still body? So far I haven't seen any, but there sometimes is a bit of a delay. While I'm waiting for those, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next poll question, which is, out of these three things that I have mentioned, shrinking or closing up into, like making yourself small into a ball, leaning, which can also be a way of pulling away from people, and fidgeting, or some other thing, which body language habit do you tend to do when you're nervous or stressed? So I'm saying nervous, but often stress is just a grown-up word for nervous, really. So here I'm getting some chat responses. Tall breathing stops the fidgeting. I love that. Scattered versus collected and calm. And I'm guessing in most of your interactions, you want to be collected and calm as opposed to scattered. Senses feel heightened. So again, that one of the wonderful things about breathing is that it pulls us into the present moment. When we're proactive and purposeful in our breathing, it helps clear the mental chatter so that we can take in what our senses are telling us. Fidgeting feels like an escape, which is exactly what it is. That's fight or flight. That's like, I got to run, while stillness keeps you in the moment. Absolutely. I tend to fidget when I'm physically or socially uncomfortable. Yep. Breathing deeply helps me bring me back to the moment. Absolutely. That's absolutely true there. So let's see. It seems like most people say that fidgeting is the one thing that they tend to do when they're nervous or stressed. Very good. Some people tend to shrink and close up. All right. I'm really curious what the other is. If you want to put those in the chat box too. What other things do you find yourself doing? Look away or not make eye contact. Good. I'm going to call that shrinking from the face. So maybe your body isn't shrinking, but the face is shrinking. So yep, that's right along those same lines. If there's any others that people want to share, I'd love to hear those. But most of the time, other short, shallow breaths. Yep, exactly. So that will lead to changes in the body. When someone is breathing well, their words are very clear and fluid. They find their words easily, and their body has a still calmness. So even if they're moving quickly, like say a runner, like an athlete, the movements might be quick, but they're fluid and they're strong. Whereas when you're not breathing well, they tend to be clipped and jerky and fidgety, basically. Other walk. I have to move more when I'm nervous or stressed. And sometimes that can be a great way to get that energy out. And I would just encourage, when you're moving, to move with purpose as opposed to fidgety. All right, I'm going to move on now because we're already 45 minutes in here. Really what all this comes down to is being mindful about what your body is doing. We all have these little tics that we do. And if you can just be proactive about them and use your body in a purposeful way, then you will be able to communicate the presence that you want. And the thing is, you have a wide range. You already do all these things that I'm telling you. You all have stood up to your full height before. You all have been calm and still before. It's simply accessing that when stakes are high that is the challenge. And that takes a little bit of practice, and it takes some intention. So the last one that I'm going to go into today has to do with space. And most people have not very much concept of space at all. When I ask clients, where are you in space? I get blank stares, which I'm going to ask you in a minute. But in our culture, we tend to be boxed in by walls. If you work in a downtown area, sometimes you can't even really see the sky. We have, our laptop screens or our phones even are as far as our attention goes. And even this lady here in this slide, this stock photo, you can tell that she's posing because no one actually holds their phone that way. Everyone's like hunched over it, like they can't see if it's not 3 inches from their face. To the point that I saw an article recently that says teenagers nowadays are getting dowager's humps because they're hunched over their phones so much. So we have these very small, concepts of space. We're kind of just aware of those few inches between our eyes and our screens most of the time. And it impacts the way we engage with people, and it impacts the way we engage in a space. So I'm going to ask that question now. How aware are you of space? Do you have, all the time, a ground sense of space? Are you mostly aware of your surroundings? Are you aware of just the space between you and whatever it is that you're interacting with? Or you have no idea what I'm talking about. Often that is the most common answer. So go ahead and think about that for a minute, and then answer what your concept of space is. So far, it looks like most people are at least aware of the space between them and the other person or the screen. And some are more aware of their surroundings, what's around them. It often has to do with how your childhood went. If you grew up in an environment where you needed to be aware of your surroundings, then that you often carry that through life, and that has its pros and cons depending on the positivity or negativity of that. So your sense of space, how much space you are aware of, gets communicated to other people. When I first stumbled across this concept, I was with a colleague and we were discussing it, and then she left momentarily. I looked out the window, and I was just watching people trying to figure out if I could actually sense how much space they were aware of. And a guy was jogging by. There was a sidewalk there. There's a low hedge, so I couldn't see from, I could only see like his shoulders enough. And as he jogged by, I went, that's weird. He's aware of the space behind him. And at first I dismissed it. I thought, that can't be. Why would I even think that? That's weird. And then when he went by a break in the hedge, I saw that he had a leash, and there was a little dog trailing along behind him on a leash. And it blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I could totally tell where his attention was. So we pick up on these little cues that people give us, and the fact is you can only have presence in the space that you claim. So if you want to have a big, bold presence, you're going to need to claim a big space. And it takes practice if you're not used to it. You need to be willing to take up space. You need to be willing to own the space that you are in. Claim it. Fill it with your presence. And the bigger the space, the bigger your presence needs to be. This is something that takes, like I said, it takes a little bit of practice. Go ahead and play with it right now. Look at your screen. So keep your eye contact there on the screen because it has nothing to do with eye contact. Clearly, if the guy's aware of the dog behind him, right? He's not looking at the dog. Keep your eyes on the screen, and while you're looking at this screen, start to just expand your sense of space so that you're aware of the whole room that you're in. You're aware of what's above you. You're aware of what's behind you. If you want to move your arms around, that helps sometimes. No, go beyond walls now. If you're in a room, which I assume you're probably not outside, go beyond the wall that's in front of you and expand your sense of space to include what's beyond that wall, the floor above you if there is one, or the roof. Go past all four walls. You can claim a space that is the size of a city block, the size of a city. You can claim the whole world if you have enough energy. When I was first learning about this concept, it was way back when I was in music school, and the woman there was teaching us, and she said, one of her students, who's a pianist, said, I never perform in a space that doesn't include my children. Now, he was living in the United States, and they were living in Russia. And he always included a space that went all that way, halfway around the world. And that changes the way your body moves. If you are moving in a big space, it sends a message that you have a big presence. So that's something to just sort of play around with for now. I'm just going to touch on that one because it's a little bit, for most people, it's not something they really considered a whole lot. So experiment with it, practice it. I love to practice at the grocery store if I have the energy. Often I don't when I'm at the grocery store. But if I have the energy, I'll walk in and I'll just sort of claim the whole store as my space, and you would not believe the way people interact with me differently based on that. I get all sorts of smiles. I get people ask me questions. I've had weird comments, like one random stranger came up to me and said, "You have a very welcoming face." And I thought that's all just from having this open sense of space. So it absolutely changes the way you come across to others, the way they relate to you, and how much presence it seems like you have. So these are our 4 components of presence. I want to get to your questions at the end, so I'm going to just go through these quickly. If you want to, just for fun on your own, for the others, which we didn't get to, you can email 15 people, ask them for 3 words that describe you, and then look for patterns. People will use different words, but you might get, for example, one person might say driven, and another person might say passionate, and another person might say ambitious, but they're all kind of along the same lines. And what you'll get from that is a sense of how you're coming across to others. So those are the 4 components of presence. Mind, you've got to be present. Body, what are you doing with it? Space, how much of it are you taking up? And others, how is all of that coming across to others? Now, one last very brief comment here on authenticity. I absolutely want you to be yourself through all of this, but please be the best version of yourself, the one that best suits the situation. People always get their knickers in a twist when I start telling them to move their body in a certain way, or maybe turn their voice tone in a different way than what they normally habitually do. They say, "Well, that's just not me." To which I say, BS. You do all these things all the time, and you already modify your approach depending on who you're talking to. You speak differently to a 3-year-old than you do to a coworker, hopefully. You speak differently to a stranger than you would to your best friend. So it is not only normal, but it is appropriate to adjust your communication to the needs of the audience or the situation. So stop using authenticity as an excuse to stay small or stay whatever it is that you need to break out of. You are much bigger. You have much wider range of nonverbal communication available to you than you give yourself credit for. I'm going to open it up for questions here. You can chat in the box here in a second. Before I start answering your questions, though, I just want to let you know that it's not on my website yet, but I have this 22-page guide on leadership presence, specifically how to communicate leadership in each of the 4 things that I talked about today. There'll be a little bit of overlap with some of the things I mentioned, but most of it is different. If you'd like that, email me at rachel@rachelbean.com, and by the end of the week, I will get you a copy of that. And so now I'm going to open it up for questions, and then I will end with a quote, and we'll be done for the day. And also, if I don't get to your question today, you can also email that to me also. Anyone
While we're
have
waiting for some folks to ask some questions, I have a quick one.
Yeah.
For people who tend to view themselves as introverts, the word expand and expanding their presence may be intimidating. Do you have any tips on how someone who sees themselves as an introvert to kind of take baby steps into these tactics that you've shown us?
Sure. So I can relate very much to that. The first time I ever took a personality assessment, I actually scored 100% introvert, and as I mentioned, I've suffered from social anxiety through most of the days. So baby steps is absolutely what it is. I would say choose one of these that seems the most accessible and try that. So for example, if you normally put your hands in your pocket, just try taking one out. If you normally stand with your arms crossed, which is personally my most comfortable way to stand because I'm usually cold, then just maybe force yourself to open those up a little bit. Another example, I had a client once who had to go to a networking event. She's like, I hate them. It's so hard to go up and talk to strangers. And so what she did is she practiced what I was talking about with the space. She would go to an event, she'd stand there, and she would just stand authoritatively with open body language and open up her sense of space, and people would come talk to her. She never had to go up and introduce herself to someone. So The other thing about all these skills, like I said, is that they do affect your brain. So the more that you are able to open up your body language, it does release testosterone into your system. So you not only look more confident, but you do actually feel more confident. So it can be sort of this spiral thing. You do take a baby step, and that will then give you the courage and confidence to go on to the next one.
Great, thanks. We have a question from Hillary. How do you make these habits? How do you cement these into a habit?
Yes, well, that's a big question, and that's one that, again, you start small, choose one, and then whatever means you have of setting yourself reminders. So I've had people do things like set the rear view mirror in their car to a certain height so that they only can see it if they're sitting up tall. People, of course, have used Post-it notes or notifications on their phones to do something. Debriefing after a situation can be very helpful. So if you've had, let's see, a positive or negative experience, and then you go, okay, what was I doing that made that positive or negative? That helps. Starting a daily breathing practice will help you get into your body. I'm also a big fan of power poses. So if you just build it into your schedule to spend 90 seconds, it doesn't even have to be that long. It can be 30 seconds. And just standing up with expansive posture, you get that in your body. So find ways to just get used to what it feels like when you're out of a stressful situation. Bring your awareness to it when everything isn't on the line, and then you'll be able to access it a little bit better in the line. If you have a partner or a buddy who's willing to help you with that can be useful too. Get that feedback.
Great. And we have a question from Jake. He asks, if you see people with a small or meek presence, how can you provide a supportive space for them to be more present?
That's a loaded question there, because you only have control over yourself. So if someone else is not willing or able to be present, you absolutely can provide a safe space. You do that by holding space for them. So that goes back to what I was talking about in terms of claiming space. You claim the space, and then we're getting a little bit nuanced here, but you can block with your attention and your energy. You can sort of put up barriers around you and the other person. Breathing is also going to communicate safety. That communicates I am a safe presence. And then in that case, you probably want to be more approachable as opposed to authoritative. You might want to relax your body language a little bit so that the other person feels more comfortable to be able to speak honestly and openly.
We have a question pertaining specific to the legislative environment. It says, in our environment, personalities are often very strong. How do we remain confident and strong without being argumentative or arrogant?
Yes. So arrogance is the opposite of confidence. It sometimes comes across like confidence, but it's usually a mask for insecurity. So confidence is standing grounded in your own space. A lack of confidence is pulling in and shrinking, like I said. Arrogance is pushing into the space of others. So you don't want to push into others' space. You want to just stay firm and grounded in your own space. And that means speaking authoritatively without getting hooked emotionally into it. Curling your voice down. Also, I would say letting go of limiting language, things like softening all of your answers with things like, well, I feel, or, well, in my opinion, and it might be better if, but just stating it as a fact, stating what is true without all the softeners can really help. But be careful that in trying to convey confidence, you're not then overtaking someone else's space.
Great. I think that's an important distinction to make. Sandy asks, space is confusing. Oh, it went away. How do we claim bigger space by the nonverbal body language?
That really is a mental exercise. So I'm going to just invite you to play with it and practice it. And claiming a bigger space, the first step to that is awareness. So however much space you are currently aware of, start thinking about what's beyond that. And it might take a while to even figure out what your current boundaries are. Are you aware of your whole office floor, or are you aware of your building? Are you aware of your desk? Some people aren't even aware of their entire desk. And again, like I said, I first learned about this when I was in music school, and I wasn't aware of the whole keyboard. I was just playing notes right in front of me. My sense of space did not even expand to the whole keyboard. So claiming a bigger space naturally results in different body language. It's not that by using body language you claim space. Maybe that's a little bit more clear.
Great. And Sabah just kind of comments that cultural differences can impact perceptions and not always easy to identify or be aware of.
Yes, absolutely true. Absolutely true. So proxemics is a big one for that. In some cultures, it's perfectly fine to stand very close to another person and touch them even, and in other cultures, that is not okay. In certain gestures or use of eye contact, those are probably the main ones I would say that you have to be careful of. But the thing is, if you are present and aware and focusing on the other person, shutting off your mental chatter, you will start to pick up on, oh, I think that person wants me to back up a little bit. I think I'm in their personal space bubble, or whatever the case may be. You'll start to know, you'll be much more aware of what they need, even if you have no idea what it is and you've never had any experience with that culture. You'll be able to pick up on it much better if you have that first mind piece and are fully present.
Nice. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up the question and answer portion. So was there a last slide you wanted to show, Rachel?
Absolutely. I would just like to share this quote with you from Brendan Burchard, who wrote The Charge, and he says, most of us are congruent with how small we think of ourselves. That's the congruence that naturally shows up in our everyday life. It's with the smallness that we sense. We're not congruent in our everyday actions with how great we know we can be. So that's what I invite you to do today and in futures, to take these little tips that I gave you, practice them, choose one or two that resonate, that you think are accessible, and expand your presence with the people around you, in your office, in your community, and beyond. And I think you will find that, like me, you can change your communication and it will change your life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And thank you all for attending our Legislative Staff Week webinar. A recording will be available within a week on the NCSL webinar archive. And please take the time to fill out the exit survey that's about to pop up on your screen. From everyone at NCSL, thank you and have a good day.